Hey everybody, this is Ray, Fluke Television beat writer for Bleeding Cool, welcoming you to the first edition of the Weekly StatX takeaways slash recap for TNT's series adaptation of Caleb Carr's 1994 novel, The Alienist. I'm glad to have you guys aboard. The reason why we're calling this a takeaway slash recap is that for the first one, I'm not going to be really going too much into this deep into the storyline, so the spoilers should be kind of light for this week. But what I did was took some notes on my handy dandy lore from Amazon notebook on some things that I wanted to make sure it kind of passed the muster to see if it was going to be something that I was going to be interested in. So I want to talk to you guys about essentially what my major takeaways were. I had a lot of pros for this series, couple concerns. I wouldn't necessarily say cons, but a couple concerns. But we're going to get right to it. There are a couple criteria I look for. I try to apply this to every series, and the reason why is because I feel like it's tough to judge a series by the first one or two episodes. I usually try to do a 6-episode rule or about a 50% rule, and by then I think I have a pretty good sense of where the series is going. I'm a big Walking Dead fan, but if I judged The Walking Dead just in the first 2 episodes, I don't know if I would have necessarily stuck with it. So that's what we apply here. So watch the episode. I want to tell you a couple things that I liked about it. The pros. First, the look, and I want to make sure I give these two people a lot of credit. P.J. Dillon and Gavin Struthers for the look and the feel of the show. The thing I loved about the book, and again, I won't be going a lot into the book, so if you haven't read the book, don't worry, we're not going that route. We're going to be judging this like a television series. But it made you feel like you were in the time period, but still made it vibrant and new, and there were uses of the way lights and shadow and the smoke and the fog were used, and I know that sounds cliche, but it's really something you're going to see and you're going to notice that really it does in a sense become its own character in the storyline. I especially love the way the angles were shot, the way the effects were done, the way a lot of I'd say a good amount of the CGI effects were really blended in smoothly. So I give a lot of credit to the look. The look really caught me in. It wasn't one of those washed out, boring type of historical period pieces. It was something that really resonated with me a lot more. Second thing, the storyline. The overall concept, this idea of a shocking storyline, and I know some people may have looked upon the storyline and said, oh, well, they're just going for shock value. I think seeing things in history, but seeing how ugly things could be, I think is really important and gives the show a lot more subtle context. This idea of a boy found murdered, dressed as a girl, turning out to be a prostitute, and all the powers that are in play that don't want this murder being investigated, in the beginnings of the first serial killer that the city has ever seen. It's just it's an amazing start to the storyline. Very curious to see how much they stick with the book as opposed to move away from it. But again, it grabs you right from the start. Some people have used the True Detective analogy in regard to this. I think when we talk about the characters in a second, I see that, but I think we also see a really classic group dynamic come into play, and again, I think that leads into the characters. And again, I always like to make sure I get the names right. Dr. Laszlo Kreizler from Daniel Brühl, and again, I think back to Inglourious Basterds. What an amazing job he did in that film. He is essentially our Sherlock Holmes, and let's just say up front, we're going to see a very Sherlock Holmes dynamic with our 3 protagonists. He is the outsider, but the one who still stays connected with the police. He's a fascinating character. The reason why they refer to him as an alienist, and the quote is very important. He concerns himself with those who alienate from their own true natures, and essentially not just the mentally ill, but we see as we learn about the Kreizler Institute, that he also cares for children who society deems to be odd or weird or different or against antisocial norms. So again, very fascinating reading the character. His dynamic when dealing with people, again, is very Sherlock Holmes, but but not from I think a bitter or anger standpoint. So I really appreciated that. His Watson, John Moore, Luke Evans. We see he's a New York Times illustrator. We see that he has his own demons that he is wrestling with, not just substance abuse, but also heavy layers of the kinky sex. And we're seeing the beginnings of a guy who is on a downward spiral. I'm very curious to see what his interactions with Dr. Kreizler and with Sarah later on are going to have an impact, and we're going to talk about Sarah in a second. are going to have on his life. He's also a concern I have that I'm going to address in a couple minutes, but I think it's an interesting dynamic to see how Moore and how Kreizler are going to feed off of one another. I think it's very interesting to see where that could possibly go. And then, of course, we have Sara Howard, Dakota Fanning, who was already starting to become one of my favorite characters. Kreizler's always going to be my character because those types of characters I always tend to gravitate to. But Sara just is... She's going to be that one, you know, that's going to be the glue. My hope is it doesn't turn into some type of thing where it's kind of like the love triangle, that aspect of it, that they don't go that route. I'd like to see, it'd be great to see two guys and a female who are just good friends, great friends in a brotherly, sisterly way, who are there for each other. But I'm loving her character already. I see so much potential in her. You know, the idea of that she, is Teddy Roosevelt, who's the New York Police Department commissioner, in the story. The fact that she is his secretary, but also serves as the liaison between the New York Police Department and between Kreizler and Moore's investigation, I think is a very interesting one. And I think that Sarah's storyline alone, I think, lends itself to a lot of really, really great side stories that could happen as they expand beyond obviously the book. So again, the cast. Also, in regards to side cast, I want to make sure I get his name right. Robert Ray Wisdom, playing Cyrus Montrose, Dr. Kreizler's driver. We're already establishing that this guy has got a serious backstory and has had some serious things going on in his past, and we get that sense of dedication that he has to Dr. Kreizler and what Dr. Kreizler essentially did for him. I think that is going to be a very interesting character to watch as we move forward. And again, I'm looking forward to him. One of the things I always say about a good first episode is how many names you start to remember right off the bat. And the fact that I refer to my notes more for quotes and general information than I do for names, I think speaks volumes. And the fact that even, Cyrus is somebody who, again, who's already making an impact, I think it speaks volumes for where the show could be going for not just our main three, but with the supporting cast characters also. The cons, this is what I want to talk about, just my two concerns. More. In regards to his situation. My only concern is this. I don't want it to become where it just becomes the John Moore show, where we essentially are dealing with him, dealing with his demons and everything else. I think it could be a very interesting story arc, don't get me wrong. I think it's something they should definitely take advantage of. But I don't want it to be something that just becomes... I don't want him to be the weight upon the trio, because when you have a trio like that, a lot of times there's always that concern that one of the characters will be kind of like the annoying dead weight. So I'm hoping that won't happen, because first off, Luke Evans I think is a fantastic actor. But again, I think the Watson dynamic that he could have with Kreizler, how they can both feed off of each other, and how Sarah can kind of be there to really hold them together. I think it'd be a very interesting dynamic. The other concern I have, I think, is long term, has to do with the look of the show. And I know it's odd to kind of go in full circle that I was praising it before. But the sequence, and we see situations involving the boy's body and how the camera work is done around that, and the graphicness of it. And I don't have issue with that, because again, like I said, I think it goes a long way towards people getting an understanding of stop having this rosy picture of how the old days were. Just because they're old days doesn't mean they weren't nasty and they weren't ugly and they weren't murderous. So I love that those things are kind of like in your face. I know there are others that may not necessarily agree with me, but I really appreciate that in this first episode. I just don't think I necessarily will need it every single episode. So my hope is that this is one of those first episode things, and over the next course of episodes, they get their footing and they get their feel. Because I think you can give the viewers a nice combination of the horrors and the grossnesses that they can think of in their head as compared to what they really need to be presented with. So I think that could be a huge improvement. But again, two cons. Otherwise, I think it's a great start. It's got me interested in storyline. I've got characters that I'm very much interested in. And again, knowing full well that I'm a sucker for the whole Sherlock Holmes detective group dynamic. Also a sucker for good overarching mythology and conspiracy theories. So it's hitting me on a lot of those levels. But I'm really enjoying it so far. And I think you guys are going to enjoy it too. You'll be watching it hopefully Monday night on TNT. If not, I'm sure you'll be DVRing it or watching it on demand. Also going to be back next Monday with a recap. We're going to say takeaways. Can't really do a recap because I have access to episode 2. So probably do some takeaways and some thoughts in there for next Monday. But otherwise, thank you guys for joining me. Once again, my name is Ray Fluck. I do television beat writing for Bleeding Cool. This is part of the Weekly Static, and this is the Alien takeaway edition of the first episode, The Boy on the Bridge. Thanks for joining me.